last month we had Joan McGregor come up and talk to us about the Sulphur Springs Measure CK. And you know that one of the things we do here at the Canyon Country Advisory Committee is we try to discuss both sides of an issue. Mike Naoum has requested to speak in opposition to Measure CK, and so we're going to give him the opportunity to do so. Let's welcome Mike, and I'll get his presentation up. Come on. All right, I'll put your presentation up.
What's advancing? Probably. Good evening. I'd like to thank the Canyon Country Advisory Committee for inviting me to this meeting tonight to share this information with you. Like most of you, I'm just a regular citizen. I've lived here for 24 years, and I get involved in local political items as my time allows. I'd like to acknowledge we have a couple Sulphur Springs board members in here, Mr. Hogan and Ms. Weinstein, and they probably have some different viewpoints on what I'm going to say tonight, but that's a good thing. Again, I'm here to talk about Measure CK. It's a $72 million bond issuance. There's about $285 million in interest that goes along with that, for total payments of $357 million. The payments would begin in 2017 and end 47 years later in 2064. There's a current bond that we're paying on. It was passed in 1990, and the payments increase every year. The last scheduled payment on that bond is $6.285 million in 2017. And that's when the first payment on the CK bond would start, which is about $1.9 million in 2017. And the last payment in 2064 goes up to almost $19 million. So it's graduated as property values increase and they can get more revenue off expected property values increasing. The bonds will be issued in 4 series, Series A, B, C, and D. As a reference point, I'm going to give you a couple calculations. The first is what Measure CK would look like as a 30-year amortizing home loan, if you will, a traditional 30-year loan where you make level payments through the term. And what you would see would be the first payment starting pretty much right after you borrow the money and going till 2047. And principal, again, $72 million. Interest would be $93 million, or about 130% of principal. The Hart District is doing a refinancing of some of their long-term debt. They're getting a 2.69% interest rate. So if you were to be able to get that kind of an interest rate, the interest component of the payments would go down to $33 million, or about 47% of principal. The first part of the bond issuance is Series A. It's issued in 2016, first payments in 2017. And interest as a percentage of principal is 156%. So compare that to the 130% that you would see on a traditional 30-year home loan. The next series issued is Series B. It is issued, the bonds are taken out in 2019. $14 million is borrowed. And the first payment, though, doesn't start till 2036. So what that means is that the district is paying interest on top of interest during that period when they're not making any payments. So interest costs are $78 million. So as a percentage of principal, it's 549%. Series C bonds, the borrowing would happen in 2022. They're for $4.5 million, and interest would be about $30 million. The first payment is 14 years after the money is borrowed, and interest payments would continue until 2062. So the bond has a term of 40 years. Series D bonds, the money would be borrowed in 2025, $18 million borrowed, $122 million in interest, and those payments would go to 2064. Interest as a percent of principal, 665%. Again, it's back-end loaded, and on this one, the payments are really back-end loaded. As a matter of fact, the $18 million payment in almost $19 million payment in 2064 is all for Series D bonds. So if we do an interest cost comparison, all the series combined, the interest as a percentage of principal is 396%. If we compare that to a normal 30-year loan, which is 130%, we're paying more than triple the interest on CK than we would for a 30-year loan at the same interest rate, and 8 times more than what Hart is paying on their bonds. There's a handout in the back that has a spreadsheet that shows basically this information in a legible format, but the column on the left is years, and then the next set of columns are all the different series. The second 3 columns are the Series A bonds, and then B, C, D in a total. And what you see is you can just see how the payments for the Series B, C, and D bonds don't start until 2036, even though the borrowing is occurring quite a bit earlier. So feel free to take the handouts in the back. Prop 39 was passed in 1990, or excuse me, in 2000, and it lowered the voting requirement for the passage of school bonds from 2/3 to 55%. As part of that, it set some parameters. One of the parameters is that the maximum tax rate for an elementary school district can only be $30 per $100,000 of assessed value. There's a 40-year maximum length on the bonds, and obviously the Sulphur Springs bonds are using that whole $30. They have essentially 3 of the 4 series are going the 40-year maximum. They're assuming a 5% annual increase for property taxes for the 47-year period in order to stick to that $30 per $100,000 in value. They're required by law to have an oversight committee, which they would have, and administrative costs are only allowed if they're directly related to the spending under the bond. I'm going to talk a little bit about the arguments that you'll see on the ballot to support the passage of CK, and then I'm going to give you some information, and you can decide whether or not the arguments hold water. One of their big arguments is it won't increase taxes. The last payment for the current bond is $6.285 million. The first scheduled payment for CK is $1.9 million, but it goes up to $18.9 million by the end of the payment cycle. Even if you don't move, you're going to see a 2% annual increase in your property taxes. So your assessed value, as your assessed values increase, your CK contribution is going to increase. If you move houses, then you're going to get reassessed probably at a higher value. You're going to see your CK taxes increase. If the assessed values rise less than the 5% annually, what will happen will be taxes will increase to cover the bond payments. There is a protection in Prop 39 that says that if the taxes at the time of the bond issuance are more than the $30 per $100,000 to pay the bonds, that the district can't issue the bonds until that gets back in line. The problem, though, is that we have 40-year bonds that are being issued, and that's a pretty long time period to expect your property assessments to go up 5% a year. One of the arguments is CK is extremely conservative. We talked about the interest costs being more than triple a standard 30-year amortized loan and 8 times more than what the Hart District's interest rate would be. The amount borrowed is the max under Prop 39. The tax assessment is the max under Prop 39. The repayment length is the max under Prop 39, and interest rates are high. Another argument is that many districts ask voters to layer payment on top of payment. That's not the case here. We saw that a little bit with the Hart District, where they passed a school bond measure to build new high schools, and they built some, but Castaic High School was left out hanging, and so we have had another bond measure passed recently to fund that. But in any event, with CK, the last bond was approved in 1990, and this one's on the ballot 22 years later. So in order for there not to be another bond layered on top of this one, the district would not need money for 48 years from the first CK borrowing, or in other words, 52 years from today. Another argument is that CK works like a mortgage. Vital school repairs are completed in the short term and paid for over time. They are paid for over time. Interest costs are quite a bit more than a typical mortgage. The school district puts out school report cards. They're found on their website. If you look at the school report cards, they each have a condition assessment for all the schools. The condition assessments are indicating that the facilities are in good condition. Some are shown as exemplary. The types of repairs that they're indicating are needed are really minor, routine sorts of repair items. There were a couple of roof repairs at one of the schools, but those were to be done, I think, in 2012. And then, while we're spending money for some of these costs, it's great to upgrade schools, but with the interest costs, we're spending essentially 5 times what the taxpayers are paying, 5 times what the school district is spending to do a repair. One of the big arguments that is on the ballot is that we're going to improve classrooms for medically fragile, disabled students and fix leaky roofs. That'll serve our schools for many years. If we took a high cost estimate to build new classrooms for medically fragile students, that'd be about $6 to $8 million of the $72 million borrowed. So that leaves, $66 to $64 million for other items. The school report cards don't really talk much about leaky roofs, and deferred maintenance money in normal budget times is available from the state. Last couple of years it hasn't been, but we're talking about a pretty significant obligation to make up for deferred maintenance money. One of the other arguments is that Measure CK will update instructional technology over time. What the district appears to want to do is establish an endowment with a portion of the proceeds. You probably can get 2 or 3% interest if you're going to invest that money today, while we're paying 6.5% interest over the 40-plus years of the bonds. The jury's out on technology improvements for elementary schools especially. There's a lot of money being spent. There's not a lot of evidence that it's improving basic learning. These are elementary school kids. They're not going out into the job market right away. I was talking to my 16-year-old daughter, and she said, I had computer lab at Sulphur Springs. We learned about Microsoft stuff. I've forgotten everything I learned there. So it wasn't particularly helpful, but that's one of the things that money would be spent on. And another argument you'll see is that all funds are going to stay local. And while that might be true with some of the proceeds from the bond measure, the taxes are going to mostly be sent out of the area because they're going to be used to pay interest to the bondholders. And perhaps we'll get some benefit from the labor component from the contractors, but the reality is we don't have a whole lot of construction materials that are produced in Santa Clarita or LA County. Other considerations, CK is using costly long-term debt to pay for what many would view as routine maintenance items like painting and repairs of hillsides, utilities, parking areas, playground areas, etc. The district continues to own the Canyon Theater complex. I don't know how many people knew that or not. The financial reports indicated that had a value of about $12 million, and they still have their old headquarters complex up Sierra Highway. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of intent to sell either one of those properties. They also have another almost $32 million of certificate of participation debt, which is essentially non-voter approved debt with expected interest costs of another $44 million. The way the language is written for the review committee or oversight committee it's written so that almost any costs are allowed, and there's no guarantee that all the projects that they identify would be completed. Kind of to sum it up a little bit, why is CK so expensive? Because really the Series B, C, and D bonds, they borrow $37 million, but interest costs are $230 million. Whereas the Series A bonds, because they're being paid right up front, borrow $34 million, but interest costs are only $54 million. So the borrowing amounts are nearly identical, but the interest costs are exponentially different. Because of the maximum assessment allowed by Prop 39 and the need to wait for property assessments to increase over time, the district has to defer payments on the bonds for those property tax assessments to increase. So because of that, the payments are really back-end loaded. They're paying interest on top of interest for probably half the term of the bonds. And so it's just an expensive proposition. I'd also argue that the district hasn't prioritized funding needs or sold assets which would allow for reduced borrowing, lower interest rates, and significantly lower interest costs. Questions?
I don't know very much about the bond, but could you explain why is the 6.5% interest? You said something about Hart was getting 2.7 interest, and
right.
Why? Would you explain the difference between those two interest rates?
The difference is that because the bond payments are so back-end loaded, in other words, they go from $2 million a year to $19 million a year, that the investors view that as a riskier investment because of the time it takes for repayment and the expectation that you can have a lot of variance in the market over that period. So they're going to look for a higher interest rate. The interest rates came from the business superintendent from the district.
I'm gonna need to get up and speak for a bit. Again, I'm not gonna ask questions.
I just want to clarify one thing. You said that the district owns two big pieces of property. One is the theater center, which has been on the market for the last 6 months with no offers. So that is incorrect. We have been trying to sell that.
Okay.
And the property on Sierra Highway that you also talked about, that is currently in escrow and is expected to close within the next 2 weeks.
Good. So let me ask you, when you sell those assets,
currently, the money from the theater center is providing over $100,000 a year to our general fund in income. So that money is going directly into the classrooms. When it sells, then we'll be able to pay down on the bonds. But currently, it's not selling. It was on the market for $18 million, not $12 million, and there were no takers. At one point, it was assessed even higher than that. The money from the property along Sierra Highway will go for one-time costs. It will not go towards salaries. It will not go towards benefits. It will not go towards any reoccurring costs. It'll go towards one-time issues.
No, I have a question. Mike. I have a question, and my question is, I've listened to both sides, and what I would really like to know is, in your estimation, what is the worst case scenario if this bond does not pass?
I guess probably the schools would defer doing some of their projects.
Hi, Mike. Joan McGregor, co-chair of the committee, and I'm the one who spoke, and you probably watched my presentation at the last meeting of this group. Wanted to clarify a couple of things, and some points have already been clarified. First of all, Mr. Naoum, my understanding is that you're in the bond market, so you really know a lot about the bonds, and I appreciate that in the private sector. Unfortunately, for school financing, schools are limited to what they can do on financing. They can only go for this type of bond or a parcel tax. This district declined to go for a parcel tax, which would have cost all of you more money that live and have property in Canyon Country. Instead, what they said is our bond currently, which I worked on 22 years ago to pass that bond as a trustee, that bond is expiring. So rather than raise taxes of the Canyon Country property owners, instead, we're letting that bond expire, and we're going to ask you to vote for a new bond. And in fact, that new bond is going to be 2/3 of the cost of the old bond. So in effect, property taxes are going to decrease, not increase. Now, second of all, or third thing, school districts have no other way of raising money, and it is like a mortgage. You get to enjoy your house while you're paying that off. While you're paying that interest to the bank, you are living in that house. Our children, my children, 22, 23 years ago, got to enjoy the fruits of that bond. The citizens of this community passed that bond. Now it's the grandchildren. It's the future generations that need those things, and they need them now. They need them in the next few years. Last point that I really want to make, which is really important and you didn't mention, is that 20 million of that 72 million is going to pay off the cops. And that's a large chunk of interest that's going to be gone. So that's... Yes, right, the certificates of... I'm sorry, for those of you not in school finance, COPS stands for Certificate of Participation. That was the interest program that Mr. Naoum was talking about earlier. So 20 million of that is reducing debt, which is critical in this day and age, is to reduce your current debt. Last point is, this is a fluctuating interest rate. You sell your bonds at what the current rate is. You do not know what those bonds are going to be. So for this scenario, this is the worst case scenario. This is plotting it out as if the interest rate is going to be at that level, if the interest rate is going to be for that long, that the bonds are going to take that long to be used. The assessed valuation is minimally going to go up in the 40 years. So all those negative things are what you used in your calculations, rather than taking at least even a midway point, which would have been a little more acceptable. So again, I just hope all of you do look into this and realize that this school district is the only school district in all of the Santa Cruz Valley that has not passed a bond in 22 years. Saugus, Hart, 2 of them, College of the Canyons, 2 of them, Newhall District just passed one. Sulphur Springs, Canyon Country students are just as good. They need the quality of education, and you need to really seriously think about this bond. It is critical. We have principals here, we have school board members, we have parents. Lots of people have come tonight, but we just want to share with you that it is critical that you look at this and not take the worst case scenario of interest rates, and second of all, not know all the points that are going to happen with the bond proceeds. Extremely important. Thank you.
Did you get that question?
I was waiting for the question. A couple things I want to say, Joan. The certificates of participation, I think it's great to pay off that debt, but you're just taking debt that would be repaid in a shorter time period, and you're kicking the can down the road with CK. You're just financing it until 2064. Probably you're going to get a revenue increment that you can use for operating expenses, but for the taxpayers, I still don't know if that's a great deal.
Hi, my name is Lynn David, and I actually am the principal at Canyon Springs School, where you probably did see the one listing of a roof repair being completed in 2012. And I'd just like to speak to your, I commend you for doing your research. I think that's excellent. I hope you all will do that. I actually, as a principal, am extremely proud of the condition of our schools that we maintain on a daily basis. And those reports that we fill out for this school accountability report card, I feel very comfortable in putting that our schools are in good repair, but what I need to clarify is I felt comfortable putting that because each month we do a monthly facilities inspection and ensure that the facilities are maintained in a safe way for children, that our roofs don't have leaks that would create mold and such. So like this last mold, I would invite you to come anytime this week or next week as we're working on repairing the leaks that occurred over this last rain. Our roofs do leak, but we immediately go around and replace them. So when we put that they are in good condition, they are, but it's costing us a ton of money that we could be setting aside for each tile. If you all think what it might cost you in your home to replace those ceiling tiles, or to have a piece of carpet repaired because it was damaged and now creates a mold hazard, we could be repairing those roofs and doing cost avoidance instead of repairs. So I would hope that you all would consider that with your home values. I know that that's something that's very important to you, and people move here because of the schools, and that's something that is a principle. When I take families, new families, they say the schools are beautiful and we moved here because of them. So I hope that you'll do your part to help us to maintain the schools in that way that makes you stand apart from LA Unified, from Antelope Valley, and even from other parts of those values, or the valley. So thank you.
Got it down.